Seth has gotten death threats himself. And in fact, Governor DeSantis of Florida stepped in. They arrested someone. So Seth, tell us a little bit about what's going on in your life and why are you getting death threats?
So,
ladies and gentlemen, if you don't believe in spiritual warfare, you haven't been paying attention. What's been going on at Charlie's murder and since? People are at one another's throats.
I'm sure you've heard this where people have said, everything you've ever been told is a lie.
Mm-hmm. Is that a lie?
Everything. Yeah. That's not. No, that's not.
That's true.
Everything else besides the statement I just made that you've been told ever in your life is a lie.
All right. Grace and peace, everybody. We got a fun one. I don't know if I'm going to say fun, but I think it's a very interesting one that just goes to show the amount of danger and the unseen danger, if you will, from our social media online Discord. So I want to bring in Frank Turek had a conversation with Seth Dillon. Lots of people really appreciated Seth Dillon and what he had to say. So I want to bring this in and give us a chance to kind of check out what their conversation was about and also allow you a chance to see and hear what were the ramifications of some of this reckless speech that's been going on here on these social media streets. So let's go.
Seth has gotten death threats himself. And in fact, Governor DeSantis of Florida stepped in. They arrested someone. So Seth, tell us a little bit about what's going on in your life and why are you getting death threats?
Well, kind of wild, right? You wouldn't think. It's certainly not one of those things that I predicted would ever happen when I started running a comedy website on the internet. That satire, first of all, that we were going to end up in this fight for free speech, which has been something that was also unexpected. But then, of course, that we would be, caught up in so many of these other things that are just unrelated to what we do. But, there's everyone's looking for a line and angle of attack. In my case, the guy that you're mentioning, his name is Nicholas Ray. He's a Texan. He lives in Houston, Texas. 28-year-old. Was accusing me and others. It wasn't just me, by the way. It was a number of other, several other conservative influencers who, I don't even know if it's important or necessary to name them because that only draws more negative attention to them potentially. Where people are going to start targeting others continually. But he was threatening several different people along the lines of the argument that there's complicity. There's stuff that's being hidden. There is, a dishonest attempt to portray ourselves, me and these other individuals, a dishonest attempt on our behalf to portray ourselves as being close friends of Charlie when we were actually traitors. We were actually, pressuring him and blackmailing him behind the scenes. All of this comes back, of course, to Israel. These theories are usually rooted in Israel and what the Jews are doing behind the scenes. And so, it initiated at the start following this retreat that myself and a bunch of other conservative influencers, I put that in quotes because I don't consider myself an influencer. I run a media company. I happen to have a large following online, but I'm not one of those people that's just like a social media influencer. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I don't consider myself an influencer, but I was invited by Charlie to this retreat. It was called an influencer retreat. And the idea of this retreat was focused on the problems, the threats to Western civilization. The theme of the retreat was, saving the West. And, Charlie, as you know, because knew him very well. Man, it sucks to say that, doesn't it?
I know.
Switch from saying you know him to you knew him. Charlie was deeply concerned about threats to Western civilization, from wherever they come, whether they're coming from ideology on the left, whether it's communism or, Islam or whatever the threat may be. He wanted to talk about what these threats were, get a handle on where we all stood, have a conversation. We draw a bunch of people together and talk about a wide range of topics and get everybody's feedback and input. I think he was looking to influence our thinking with his positions, but also hear from us and understand, where we were coming from and get our insights. He seemed very, genuinely open in hearing from us and what we had to say. He kept, he threw it to me several times when I was keeping my mouth shut during these meetings. He's like, Seth, what do you have to say? You've been quiet for a while. Chime in, say something. What do you think about this? So he was seeking feedback and input and wanting to find out, how we can best address these issues and how we can get the message out to speak the truth and defend Western civilization against its greatest threats. So that was really the purpose of this retreat that was being set up in the Hamptons back in August. And I was invited there by Charlie. What has been characterized as, this initiated originally, I think there was some report in a publication called The Gray Zone, and Candace Owens picked it up and started talking about it on her show. There was somebody at this retreat that began talking about what happened there, and I don't know. This is something that I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate as to what actually occurred behind the scenes in the revealing of what happened at this retreat. But somebody that was there started, talking to sources about what took place there, and either they misrepresented it horribly, dishonestly, grossly, or the people who received the input from this person, the report from this person, exaggerated and distorted it themselves. I'm not sure which is true. I don't know. Because it hasn't been publicly known yet who it was that was leaking this information to reporters or whatever.
But whoever it was, that person was
wrong.
Well, they were very wrong, because here's what they said. They said that what happened at this retreat was, an intervention was staged for Charlie, where people who have more alliance and allegiance with Israel than with the United States, people who care more about, Israel first, not America first people, were, very concerned about some of Charlie's comments or some of the people that Charlie was having on the stage at Turning Point USA events. And because of those concerns, they wanted to have an intervention with Charlie and say, hey, look, we don't like this. We consider this anti-Semitic. You need to get back on board with supporting Israel, no questions asked. And strong-armed and blackmailed him at this intervention. And the whole point of this thing was to get Charlie back in line. And it's alleged, there was even an offer of money, a substantial offer. It was, I think the figure that Candace put out there was $150 million. Apparently,
that's crazy.
Bibi himself was on the phone. There was these heated conversations behind closed doors. I was named as being a part of these conversations, and all this money was thrown at Charlie, and Charlie turned the money down, and then he winds up dead. And, so what do you make of that, Frank? What do you do with those dots? How do you connect them? What does that mean? And of course the spotlight of suspicion is cast on people who were at this event, at Charlie's invitation. No one staged an intervention with Charlie. It's just ridiculous to suggest that was what was happening there. I didn't know this event was happening until Charlie told me it was happening and he asked me to be there. So everybody was there at his request. It was a Turning Point event. And so, but it was the conspiracy theory itself that there was something nefarious going on here, malicious intent on the part of some of these participants, including myself, that has led to, all this animosity and hatred towards me. If Charlie is feeling all this pressure and he's being blackmailed and he's, under duress in his last days, and then, he winds up dead because he didn't go along with what we wanted. Of course, people are going to start looking at me and thinking, I had something to do with that, and that I'm like complicit in his murder. And so people who bought into some of this stuff, which is just wild and outlandish, distortions of what happened, some of them have started to level threats. So I've been receiving a number of threats. Many of them have been reported. That one guy has been arrested so far. Thankfully he has. I have a wife and kids at home. I don't want to put anybody in danger. I certainly haven't said anything to deserve that, or done anything to deserve that. But of course, that's kind of the natural outworking of some of these wild, speculative, conspiratorial claims, is that, you get people riled up and they get angry. There are a lot of people, as you know, Frank, a lot of people, millions of people who love Charlie. They loved Charlie. And when they come to learn, and some of them, not everybody is perfectly mentally healthy.
That's
There's
right.
people out there who are deranged. When they learn that there's a name and a face of somebody who may have played a role in Charlie's death, it enrages them. and they feel like they need to do something about that, either to intimidate, harass, or to threaten them. And so that's really kind of the long and short of it.
So who was it that publicly said that this happened in such a way that Charlie was offered $150 million to do something for Israel and he denied? Who was it that put that out there? Is it known?
I think the first time that was reported, I'm not sure if that dollar figure was reported by Max Blumenthal or Candace Owens first. I think she may have gotten that from him. But I'd seen him do some interviews where he was talking about this, and yeah, there's this fabricated story that there were these heated discussions. Charlie was pressured, Charlie was coerced, Charlie was dragged into these private meetings, these personal meetings between myself, Bill Ackman, Bibi Netanyahu's on the phone, and we're throwing money at him, and he's refusing it, and then he winds up dead. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of the story.
Money at him to do what?
Throwing money at him to get him back in line with his support of Israel. There's I guess what the theory is that the people like me, because I'm a supporter of Israel. Of course I'm a supporter of them in the sense that I defend them in their right to defend themselves, right? Their right to not be wiped off the map, right? People like me, as the story goes, are so concerned with Israel that we're willing to do anything that it takes to punish anybody who is not on board with supporting them, and we'll want to coerce them, and we'll want to blackmail them and whatever. And it's like, it's all so ridiculous. If I have disagreements with Charlie, and there were a couple of things that I disagreed with Charlie on, there were things I disagreed with him on at this retreat in the Hamptons, but the whole purpose of that retreat in the Hamptons was to have discussion and debate. Charlie wasn't afraid of debate. You know that.
That's what he was all about.
That's what he was all about. He loved having discussions with people that didn't necessarily see eye to eye with him. And he saw it as a way not just of trying to persuade them, but also to kind of sharpen himself in his response to some rebuttals and objections. And so, he invited us there and challenged us. And when he wasn't getting challenged enough, like I said, he would pick people out of the room and say, what do you have to say about this? What do you think? Give me your input. Let's talk about it. And so, he was inviting this debate. There was no sense in which, he was being pressured on anything.
This was in August or late July of this year, because I remember that. And I saw Charlie right after that in August. We were together in California, and then he and I went to Phoenix together to do some more training. And then, let me add to this, the day before he was murdered, I was with him for the 3 days, his last 3 days of his life. And we were in a meeting, a Zoom meeting right there at TPUSA. Josh Hammer was one of the people who was on Zoom, and a couple other folks from Israel. And we were talking about, Charlie wanted to know how could he better answer questions on campus that he got about the Israeli-Hamas situation. And he wanted to know from the Israelis what their perspective was. He was asking them. He wasn't turning on Israel. He was asking them for their opinions on questions he might get.
Yeah.
Hold on, wait. So that means Frank Turek was on that infamous Zoom call with Josh Hammer and others. Yeah, man. This is just wild. Shout out to Frank.
So the idea that somehow Charlie was turning on Israel is nonsense. Charlie helped elect the most pro-Israel president in U.S. history. And you can speculate all you want, but is there any evidence that this took place? And you were an eyewitness in this meeting, and you say it never happened.
No, and there were a lot of other eyewitnesses that spoke up. Of course, Bill Ackman put out his own statement. I put out a lengthy statement about this. Several others, I think there were at least 8 or 9 others that were in attendance there who said, there was none of these heated, back and forth. There was nobody coercing or pressuring anybody. I didn't see any of that. I personally didn't witness any of that and didn't partake in any of that. It's even if you can see the point. Let's for example, let's say for example that Charlie was reconsidering his position on Israel and having a conversation about that with people in the room, and they're giving him arguments and saying, "Well, have you thought about this?" Or "This is my opinion on it." That's debate and discussion. It's still not coercion and blackmail and some kind of like egregious and unethical or evil pressure campaign being applied to somebody. Everybody has a right to give their opinion, Frank. And when you're invited to, and you're asked to be there to give your opinion, you're going to give your opinion. But the conversation wasn't one where where Charlie was like, I'm against Israel now, try to change my mind. It wasn't like that at all.
That's how they
And
presented
we did
it.
discuss the topic of Israel, and there was some discussion about that. One of the things that Charlie and I did disagree on during these discussions, and I talked about this some, but there was like, he was concerned about the fact that there is right now in the discourse like a price to be paid for from his perspective, at least, there's a price to be paid for criticizing Israel. If you're critical of Israel, then automatically people snap to this line of, okay, you're being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, some do. Yeah, right.
Some do.
Yeah,
You're being anti-Semitic. And apparently Charlie, I didn't see or I'm not aware of anybody who was calling him an anti-Semite, but apparently Charlie, of all people, was being called an anti-Semite, which is just, as you know, ridiculous.
You know what that did? That hurt him personally.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
Because that it wasn't true.
Right.
Charlie was trying to, rightfully, as anybody would, and here's what I said to him about this whole bless Israel thing. I said, Charlie, let's assume that's true. We need to bless Israel. Bless doesn't mean you agree with Israel on everything.
Right.
Just like if you're going to bless your son or your daughter, you don't agree with your son or daughter on everything, or a friend. You tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. You correct them when they're wrong. And he said that was worth the price of the whole trip when I went out there, because people, they misunderstand what bless. It doesn't mean you agree on everything. If you're going to bless somebody, tell them the truth, correct them when they're wrong. There's that proverb that says, the enemies multiply kisses, but wounds from a friend are helpful.
Yeah.
You need wounds from a friend when you're out of line.
Right.
And but this
Charlie
was fair-minded. He was trying to work through issues. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
And this was the one point of disagreement where we really kind of went back and forth, and not an extended way, but only for a couple of minutes, was on this issue of, do you pay more of a price for criticizing Israel or for criticizing the critics of Israel? Because that was my argument. I was like, well, look, Charlie, of course, depending on the context, if you're running a large nonprofit organization, if you do happen to have some large donors who are Jewish or supporters of Israel, and you come out and you start being very critical of them, of course, you're going to face pushback from people who are like, well, Charlie, you're no longer aligned with our views or values or something like that. You might get pushback. And depending on your the context that you're in, you're going to see some negativity and pushback on those things. You may even get called an anti-Semite, which is ridiculous, but you might, and that happens, sure. In my case, and I told him, in my case in particular, I've received most of the pushback and hatred and cancellations of subscriptions and threats and all of these things because I've criticized the people who are criticizing Israel, not Israel. Right. I haven't criticized Israel. I've criticized the people who are criticizing Israel in an unfair way, where they're not actually criticizing Israel. They're actually going far beyond that in many cases and actually being anti-Semitic themselves, where they're just looking for any excuse they can to blame Jews or Israel for every bad thing that happens in the entire world. If I push back on those people, they turn on me. They've attacked me. They've called me a betrayer and a traitor, and they keep bringing my name up and trying to drag me through the mud and smear me and lie about me and accuse me, of course, like the conspiracies that we're talking about. They've done all of that, and so I've paid a high price for doing the opposite of that. And so it's just a matter of any time that you take a stand on a controversial issue on either side of it, you're going to get pushback. So that was one of the things that we disagree on. But, one of the things that I was accused of was calling Charlie anti-Semitic, which is ridiculous. I would never do that. I've never even considered the possibility that there might even be an anti-Semitic bone in his body. So,
ladies and gentlemen, if you don't believe in spiritual warfare, you haven't been paying attention. What's been going on at Charlie's murder and since? People are at one another's throats, and they're often saying, well, we just care about who really killed him. We're going to get into the FBI and what they have revealed and reasons why they might not be revealing certain things. But I want to deal with this issue of the difference between a possibility and evidence for a possibility. I got asked a question last week at a Bible study I was doing about Candace Owens. And I said, there's a difference between a possibility and evidence for a possibility. And if you don't have evidence for this possibility and people are implicated in it, shut up. Okay? Because you're I don't mean shut up that you don't have the right to speculate on possibilities, but when you go beyond possibility and you're insinuating that someone who is innocent is guilty and you have no evidence that they're guilty,
That's right.
I think you've crossed a line, certainly a line in Christianity, if not a line in just human decency. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the word I used when I was talking about this on Piers Morgan's show the other day was despicable. I find it despicable to do this. I think it's I don't know ultimately what motivates some of these things. It's hard to guess at that. You know, you never know what someone's motivations are unless they tell you what their motivations are.
However, that's what Candace Owens is doing. She's questioning everyone's motivation.
Yes. Yeah.
And
That's what she's doing. Yes. But I don't like to do that with other people. I don't like to question their motives, but I do see that there is a lot of there's a lot of incentive. Let's just say that there is incentive to putting out wild conspiracies. You know, first of all, let's take a step back and just talk about why conspiracies are so attractive to people. You know, people are very, I think, susceptible right now to conspiratorial thinking because, I mean, we've seen conspiracies come true, Frank. It's just
how about COVID?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen conspiracies come true
By the government.
By the government.
Yeah.
We've also seen things that, you know, were treated as wild conspiracies, like, oh, the lab leak theory, you know, we bring up, that's a good example, you know, like things that you would, that people were putting out there as, that were perfectly reasonable, that were treated as conspiracy theories, that turned out to actually have validity to them to be true. You know, we've seen a lot of that. So there is a lot of distrust. There's a lot of skepticism, when it comes to narratives that come from the government, that come from official sources, that come from the media. I get it, Frank. You know, like the Babylon Bee has been the subject of a lot of misinformation. You know, when the New York Times said that we were trafficking in misinformation under the guise of satire, they were actually trafficking in misinformation under the guise of journalism. You know, we've seen a lot of this stuff over the years where the media is dishonest, the government is dishonest. Less so with the Trump administration, you know, than when the Democrats are in control and they're just trying to shape their own narratives, in my opinion. But we've seen a lot of it. So I do think there's justification for having some skepticism. I've always been a believer, though, and I'm sure you would agree with me on this, that there's a crucial difference between you know, rational skepticism, where you're like, you know, I want to have good reasons for believing that this is true. If I'm not going to believe that it's true, you know, if there's reasons to doubt that it's true, there's got to be good reasons for that. You know, like skepticism can be perfectly rational, but there is an extent that you can go to where you start driving off this path into very irrational skepticism, where you become skeptical of everything.
You're cynical of everything.
Cynical of everything, you know, and you hear it a lot. I'm sure you've heard this, where people have said, you know, everything you've ever been told is a lie.
Right.
Is that a lie?
Everything. That's not. No, that's not.
That's true.
Everything else besides the statement I just made that you've been told ever in your life is a lie. And that's, you know, of course, that extends to historical record, all the history that you've been told. Oh, well, you know, that was just a narrative propped up by so-and-so, you know, whether it was the Jews, you know, it was something.
Can I stop right there just for a second? I just want to make 2 quick points. First, in order to say everything that you've been told is a lie, you'd have to know what the truth is, because you can't detect a lie unless you know the truth. And secondly, this entire discussion shows another reason to believe the Bible, because the Bible is the only religious book in the world that gets human depravity right. In other words, everybody thinks, and even many Christians, a majority of Christians think people are inherently good. Yet when you look at this situation, people are rightfully questioning the FBI. They're rightfully saying, well, there could be a conspiracy out there, because we know human depravity is true, right? We know that people will do crazy things for sex, money, or power. We know they will do that. And yet part of the reason these conspiracy theories are fueled to such an extent on the internet is because we personally enjoy thinking about evil from afar. I mean, why are the top podcasts out there, all these crime podcasts? Why are people fascinated with evil from afar? But as soon as it happens to them personally, they're horrified by it. Evil is attractive from afar, but up close in real life, it's horrible. So those of us who were at the murder, we're horrified. I can't watch the videos. I can't look at them. When I had J. Warner Wallace on, my cold case homicide detective, I said, Jim, there's so many different conspiracy theories out there. Would you watch all the videos and give me your opinion? People can go watch the podcast from about 3 or 4 weeks ago with him on. I can't watch them. But people who weren't there, they're fascinated by this. And by the way, it's just showing that there's something inherently wrong with our nature. We're fascinated by evil and we're ho-hum at good. We don't report good things in the newspaper. It's always evil. If it bleeds, it reads.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Right? And so those two observations should also make us skeptical of people who are coming up with wild theories about how Charlie was actually killed. We're going to get to the reason why you haven't heard from the FBI here a little bit later in the program, but it's not because they're not looking into these things. There's another reason for it. But sorry, I interrupted. I just had to make that point. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. It's a good point. Where I was going was just to say that, I think that because of the skepticism and the distrust that's there, there are people who see an opportunity in that. There are people who see an opportunity in exploiting the distrust. And when I say that, what I mean is they realize that they can say, look, because everything you've ever been told is a lie, you can't trust the narrative, and I'm gonna be the one who's going to open your eyes and enlighten you to the truth. And I'm gonna drop these little breadcrumbs along and tease these things, and one episode after another, I'm gonna take you on this journey to the truth, and expose all of the lies.
So we have to distrust everybody but you then.
Right. Yes.
The person doing that. Right?
You become. That's where it's very cult-like, is you become the trusted source that people rely on for the truth, to the point where they don't trust anything else. They just trust that one voice.
All right. So shout out to Frank Turek as well as Seth Dillon. I thought this was a great conversation. I just want to get a couple of highlights from there and just allow you the chance to hear. Seth was at the infamous Hampton retreat. Seth has been a victim of being targeted because of the conspiracies that are out there, so on and so forth. And of course, Frank was at Charlie's assassination right there in 4K. So to hear these men's perspective, I think is very helpful. But I do think the overall narrative is that maybe we should calm down some of the rhetoric, calm down some of the conspiracies, allow things to marinate and allow things to kind of fester and kind of make more sense over time, versus we got to get this right now, because we really don't. And I think we only stand at risk of creating problems if we are rushing in. We got to get some knowledge. We got to get something out there. And look what happens. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. You agree? Do you disagree? Do you like what Frank and Seth had to say? Where do you land in all of this? Let me know down in the comments below. I really do appreciate it. Until next time, everybody, grace and peace. See you soon. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the JWhit Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please do me a favor and hit me up with that 3-piece special. Like the video, subscribe, and of course, share it with somebody who would also enjoy this type of content. And make sure you leave a comment, because I do pin the best comments to the top. So thank you so much for tuning in today. And until next time, everybody, grace and peace.